Okay, let's go ahead and get started. Well, welcome to the new year. It's January 29th of 2020. Hope everyone either listening live or listening to it on demand has had a great holiday break and has hit the new year running. It's been productive so far. Today's webinar is titled The Top 10 Use Cases for Network Automation in 2020. We were originally going to hit the ground running here in January with jumping right into product demos and kind of showing some of the new latest and greatest. And we thought we'd best serve our audience by kind of stepping back and explaining about, the top use cases that we're hearing from our customers and the problems that we're solving in the marketplace, and kind of set a framework for the year, or at least a half year. Things always change as you go. But I hope that you learn from these use cases and maybe see some applications that you're facing in your organization as well, and understand how Gluware can help you solve them. So just a couple quick housekeeping notes. This webinar is being recorded. It will be posted most likely at least by tomorrow at the latest on our gluware.com website. We have put up a dedicated webinar page. So if you go under collateral, there's a webinar page or resources, I believe, and you can view it there on demand as well, or point your colleagues to it. Also, there will be some time at the end for Q&A. So if you have questions along the way here, please use the Zoom function and go ahead and submit that, and I will address as many as possible at the end. So again, appreciate your time today, and we expect to kind of try to get through this fairly quickly and hopefully end about 15 minutes early. So with that, let's get going. Just a very quick introduction. Speaking today is myself, Michael Howe. I lead the product management and marketing here at Gluware. I started my career in network operations for IBM, and really kind of lived the pain, if you will, of all the challenges that come along with operating a network, from working the tickets and the queues of the daily changes, to the many hours spent troubleshooting, to going through the pain of upgrading devices in the field and having to deal with failures and outages and all those fun things. I did move on into network engineering and architecture and design. My division was sold to AT&T. So had the additional experience of working with one of the largest carriers in the world, and also moved on to the test industry and served in product management and other roles for companies like Ixie and Spirent, helping customers adopt the newest, latest technologies into the network. And just most recently here, I've been with Gluware almost 4 years now. So I hope to share some of my knowledge that I've gained while working with customers and their path on network automation. Very quick agenda slide here. I'm going to introduce you to Gluware just so that it helps set up the framework, or your understanding of what Gluware does, what it potentially doesn't do. And when we approach the use cases, you can correlate, the functionality Gluware brings to the piece of Gluware that actually delivers that functionality. So I think it will be a good baseline of understanding as we jump into the next part, which is really the heart of this content, is the top 10 use cases for network automation here in 2020. One quick slide on business case. Sometimes it's overlooked. We always like to jump right into the technology side, but understanding the business case and the business drivers are incredibly important, as we'll get into. And then we have one slide on plan of action, and we'll leave a little bit of time for Q&A at the end. Again, our goal is to wrap up this session and give you a little bit of time back at the end today. So why is network automation important? And really, who is it important to? So let's start at the top, kind of top down. And I would, emphasize and encourage you to ensure, if you're not at the director or CIO, CTO level, that understand your organization's view on network automation and understand if there's an automation strategy. Because a lot of the content in this report is based on recent analyst content from organizations like 451 and EMA and Gartner, and what they're sharing, is high double digits of organizations that are planned to be investing in automation. 451 said 72% of organizations expect to increase IT automation in the next 2 years. EMA said 92% of network managers claim they have a formal initiative to expand use of network automation, and 70% said that is a high priority. So if these are high priorities, they should be kind of coming from the top down. And so the director level within the organization, the leadership, will own the business case, right? And they essentially own the budget. So if there is spend and or organizational shift or change, it's going to have to happen from the top down. So building a business case as you may be investing in new automation, building a return on investment, understanding the total cost of ownership is a critical step. And then probably some of the most important items are aligning with priorities. If you go and talk to a CIO, CTO, which we've had the pleasure of doing it in quite a few organizations we work with, network automation is not, they understand it's a supporting point, but it's not the end goal. The end goal is keeping up with certain business objectives. Maybe it's a strategic move to the cloud or the deployment of a new application. It's something much more aligned with that organization's business priorities. And so the challenge at the management level is, how do we align with the business priorities? And oftentimes when Gluware is able to interact and have those conversations, understand the business priorities, we can translate to how network automation can help accelerate those. And then they also should have the vision for strategy for the long term. Looking at 2020 and beyond, most director level, and as you get up to this, you're looking at usually 5-year plans you're executing on. So they should have a visibility as to what areas of the network are being refreshed, what are not, right? There's always legacy in the network. Where are you kind of shifting more things to the cloud? What are you keeping on-prem? What are you outsourcing? What are you keeping in-house? All those really are handled at the management level. Next is at the engineer and architecture level, and I serve this function and role, and I have to say it's probably one of the most enjoyable careers, as you're always tasked with, if you like problem solving, that is, you're tasked with solving the problems, right? It's evaluating new technology. It might be new vendors' hardware, might be new software solutions, or some combination. It might be those questions and struggles of moving to the cloud or containerization, or any of these kind of new technologies coming up. Everyone now is talking about 5G and Internet of Things and other things. So network engineering and architecture are really looking at what's going into the network, what's being deployed over the next few months, years, and they have visibility of that. So kind of like, how can automation help solve current problems? There are, when you look at the management plane in a network, there are always a plethora of tools. And one of the things that you always get the smile or the cringe probably is that in many cases, by their choice or someone previous to them, there are a lot of legacy tools. Some of these tools are very single purpose. Some of these tools are just ingrained in the process, so they're difficult to change. But as they evaluate new products, they're always looking at what can you replace. And often a benchmark in the network engineering architecture land is, hey, you got to at least replace 2 or more of these old or legacy solutions, and give me a way to do it better and help me consolidate. And then the third is really looking at the technology and its ability to adapt to change. Because if you look at technology any moment in time, it's always changing. And if SD-WAN is the hot technology today, and maybe software-defined data center or maybe something in the cloud is probably maybe a strategic goal, it's understanding how a technology can adapt to the changing needs of an enterprise. Meaning, if you give me one canned solution and we change gears next year as a software vendor or an automation platform, how can you adapt? Finally, probably the most important folks are the ones who are going to probably run it day to day, network operations. And from many reports out there, 451, EMEA, all these, is that they're really hung up in is the trust in the solution. So and everyone has a war story. Everyone maybe rolled out a new tool or product in the network. Maybe someone ran an automation script and caused an outage. So there is a trust issue that has to be overcome. And so this is a fundamental challenge. They're also currently incentivized. Usually they're measured on uptime. So they're all about minimizing downtime and outages. So anytime you're introducing something new, it's a risk. So you have that barrier to kind of overcome. But if you can flip it to the positive and show them how they can do their job better, eliminate those mundane tasks, eliminate manual errors that they're stuck troubleshooting, accelerating the tasks of moves, adds, changes, those daily tickets that are working. If you can really get them on board with the benefits, you'll be successful in your automation strategy and deployment. So just to set the landscape, if you will, is that when you talk about automation, it's important to understand what network domain are you talking about. So this is pretty high level, but you have the domains of the campus and the LAN and probably Wi-Fi. You have the WAN, the wide area network. Maybe it's MPLS, or maybe it's discrete circuits, or the ones I used to work on were frame and ATM and MPLS. And some of that technology has not gone away. Then you have new technologies. Many organizations have either begun to adopt or are adopting, in things like SD-WAN. When you introduce some of the newest, latest, greatest, like SD-WAN, oftentimes they involve a controller, and there is the ability to have some level of automation and control software-based programmability to these domains. So that's important. Obviously, SD is for software defined, right? Data center, primarily switches, routers, load balancers, firewalls, all kinds of equipment in here. And again, there may be some data centers that have been going towards software defined solutions, maybe some part of the data center or some overlay in the data center. It's been very popular. And then sometimes you have dedicated security domains or brand new firewall vendors that do introduce controllers. And then those things are all primarily on-prem. There are security solutions like Zscaler that are in cloud and others. But then you also have obviously cloud. So AWS, Azure, Google, and others provide cloud services. And nearly all enterprises have some means of using the cloud. So when you look at all these domains, and you think, well, where does Gluware play exactly? Well, Gluware happens to be multi-vendor, multi-domain network automation and orchestration. So Gluware actually plays across these. The ones we're not probably as deep in to this point yet are in the cloud space, but we've done numerous proof of concepts, and we're moving fast in that area. But our strong suit really has been the rapid automation of the so-called legacy, the pieces that are not programmatic, because Gluware adds bolt-on kind of software control to these domains. And even if you've moved to something like software-defined WAN, oftentimes these can be template-based automation approaches for config management and others. And therefore, the need to automate through the controller API is also an opportunity for Gluware. So just to say is that we actually play across all these domains and can help automate as little or as much as needed. It's really about understanding the gaps that you have in your organization. So looking at your network today, and you're thinking multi-vendors, generational feature gaps, meaning old and new products, multiple operating systems running multiple devices. These things are all the problems and challenges as to why we haven't solved this problem already. There are so many variables at the network layer, it's difficult to just put something on top of it which can deal with all those variables. And as you, let's say, if you're a small network and can refresh all your switches or routers to the latest generation that maybe comes with software package and it's vertically integrated, that's great. But where Gluware really shines is in the very large enterprises that are struggling with all these complexities, and really how to have software that can deal with all the variables. So the kind of what if, right? What is the panacea? Well, our customers are actually achieving these results of things like 98% reduction in time to deploy changes in the network, enhancing security, even when you think about patching software on devices or OS upgrades. We have had companies move from upgrades, once in 5 years to being able to do monthly patches. Agility, being able to really reduce that time when you're working the ticket to implement change. And let's say you have to roll out a global change of a firewall list or a domain name server, be able to take that change and roll it out within 24 hours. And these are real results. So that's kind of maybe the most sales pitchy thing you're going to hear. But I want to just highlight how the platform is built so you kind of understand why we're able to do these things. So at the very bottom here, you kind of look at, well, what do we automate? We already talked about the domains, but if you really look at the devices we automate, It's routers, switches, firewalls, load balancers, WAN optimizers, wireless LAN controllers, and more. We actually added proxy DNS recently. And what our platform is able to do is we write a vendor adapter into our platform that enables us to read and write to that given operating system. So we have onboarded 21 operating systems to date, and that enables our engine to, once we read, we actually on the fly, we data model that information. So everything we read into our system becomes a data model and therefore makes it programmatic. If you have APIs in the network as well, this could be device APIs or controller APIs. We're also able to automate APIs and rapidly onboard them. So Gluware is pure software. We are either software as a service to run from the cloud. We run from public cloud like AWS. We also can deploy into private cloud. We have some announcements coming up about that shortly. And we're highly scalable. So by being software and having an intelligent orchestration engine which processes these models, we've actually been able to implement a distributed architecture where we can deploy provisioning engines where needed, so we can hit very high scale. When you think about, not only do I want to implement a change across, let's say, 1,000 devices or 10,000 devices, but let's say I want to get that done within 1 hour. Let's say I have a maintenance window or reacting to an issue. Gluware can scale vertically in that sense by adding additional provisioning engines to distribute the workload and implement those changes. So that intelligent orchestration engine is really the heart of Gluware and our ability to read, write, and understand networking concepts. Layered on top are our so-called intent-based applications. So when you think intent, means you have a business-based objective, and this is where in control, we expose our device manager for inventory and assessment. We have an application for configuration drift and audit to monitor config changes, to monitor or run audit reports. We're going to talk more about that. OS Manager is our latest release of an upgraded platform for automating operating system upgrades on the network layer. Config modeling is our technology and approach to managing configuration. Gluware deconstructs configuration into features and enables our engine to automate as many or as few features as you want on the network. So we can automate things as complex as EVPN with underlays and overlays. Our heritage was automating SD-WAN in the original Cisco IWAN offering. So we can do very, very complex integrated solutions, or we can also automate things that are very straightforward, like syslog and DNS and NTP, where you bring your own config, you bring your own policies into our platform. They can also be dynamically read from the network, and then we enable centralized control. And then finally, from the app's point of view, and this is covered in research by 451 and others, is that the goal of automation is to begin to get beyond just low-level task-based work and move up towards automating procedures, automating end-to-end activities. And so the workflow capability within Gluware allows us to stitch those activities together and work anything that can be well-defined in a process. Gluware can implement each step in the workflow and then automate that. So things that are highly repeatable, that require multiple steps, things that require third-party integrations, like maybe with an IPAM or with an ITSM like ServiceNow. Maybe there's workflows very specifically for troubleshooting. Really, whatever you require is very possible through the workflow capability. And as mentioned, Gluware is a bring your own policy, bring your own configuration. We're very flexible to onboard what you need. We have moved away from a highly prescriptive approach where, let's say that the automation product is very strict about what it does. It's actually very, very flexible. So with that, just a couple minutes here on how our customers generally consume Gluware, and this will tie into the action plan, is that Our device manager is one of the first things you use within the product to execute discovery and inventory. As mentioned, over 21 operating systems supported today by the largest vendors in networking. Oops. Next, we often have customers using our drift and audit application, again, monitoring config for change. You then can potentially remediate if you need to, and executing audits for standard compliance, so PCI, DSS, HIPAA, NIST, like security recommendations. I mentioned OS Manager. It's a dedicated app to execute, to plan, to verify your plan, and execute operating system upgrades. So we're going to talk more about that. As you get into the end of your first month with Gluware, oftentimes our users are beginning to automate standard globals. Okay, so like SNMP or AAA or NTP are very common things to kind of tackle first. As you get into your 60-day and on period is when you can tackle those ones that are a little more complex, that require a little more verification and work. Gluware handles abstractions, so when you have routers and switches with different interface, like one is a GigE 00, another is GigE 0/0/0, right? You can't hard code that. You create abstractions in Gluware for our engine to deal with that, and then do things like automate QoS and network administration control and ACLs and others. So finally, workflows. Again, this is really where you're moving more towards the so-called intent level, where there's a very clear objective that you're looking to verify. And then finally, as you're moving on beyond 60 days, often customers are looking at, any of the API integrations they need, as mentioned, with things like ITSMs or CMDBs and others. And the term intent-based, just to address that real quick, there's the intention or the intended state you want to put the network in, maybe from a business level. But then, the definition of an intent-based is that it is closed loop, meaning there is a verification that you remain in that intended state. And Gluware is a closed loop system that does verify all the changes, and it also enables monitoring on an ongoing basis that you remain in that state. So more on that in future sessions, and there's information on our webpage. So let's jump right into the heart of it, the top 10 use cases for network automation in 2020. And this is, I'm not going to go through each one of these, but just to say that, again, the sources of this list largely came from our direct interaction with customers and what they're doing. But also, again, reports out there from 451 and EMA. We recently sponsored an EMA report, and the top drivers when they surveyed their customers, their readers about automation strategy, the top one was around risk reduction. So it was security and compliance. So security and compliance are the top 5 of everyone's list, but elimination of human error and proactive problem detection really falls into that minimized downtime and outages, and agility and responsiveness, right? So and then quite a few, as I mentioned, most enterprises that we work with have cloud initiatives. So how can you accelerate? So let's jump through these and dig deeper into each one. So security, again, top of mind for any IT executive out there. And the difficult thing about security is that you are certainly never done. You never have a day of rest. You never have a point in which there's really breathing room. One of the toughest things to do is keep up with all the vendor vulnerabilities. So vendor vulnerabilities, I'm going to go through these and then talk how Gluware addresses each one. Configuration integrity. This one is also quite challenged because when a configuration falls out of its desired state, ultimately you're leaving holes and gaps. We recently had a customer tell us that in part of a troubleshooting process, they remove access lists, right? Well, if those access lists are not put back on, that device is vulnerable. We've had customers tell us that they configure passwords, static passwords on devices when, sometimes when troubleshooting or when having issues or someone can't get in, and leaving static passwords. So there are numerous accounts where a configuration challenge took a device out of policy, out of your own policy, out of standards policy. Maybe you're you violated a NIST security recommendation, has taken that device out of policy and therefore left it exposed. Configuration management, this is the other side of that, which is how do I ensure all my devices are at the desired state? And when I look at all the things I need to configure, there's dozens of features, usually hundreds, if not thousands of lines of config code on every network device. Gartner recently, in one of their recent documents, and again, I'll have pointers to some of these that I reference, is that they reference that firewall rule sets, or ACLs, can be thousands of lines. And the challenge with that too is oftentimes you have the issue of the certain lines are not needed anymore, but no one ever goes and does cleanup. So this kind of gets into the Gluware response to these things, is that number one, you need to enable the automation, the operations and engineering team to be able to respond rapidly. For vendor vulnerabilities, our inventory and assessment allows you to inventory the devices you have on the network, understand what operating systems you're running, do any reporting you need to do to see if you're running things that are out of your own policy. We have third-party integration with Cisco to perform assessment to look at things like end-of-life, end-of-sale, PCerts, which are security advisories, and even SmartNet contract information. So understanding that and keeping up with the vendor challenges is very important. Around configuration integrity, the Gluware config drift and audit are really popular for this. Most our customers that have deployed Gluware at this point are now running drift on a regular basis, usually at least every 24 hours, and they understand exactly what has changed on the network. And some have even taken the extra step to execute a remediation every 24 hours to force the networks to be in policy. Some of the companies we work with, and MasterCard was a public reference for this, is that they're on the board of the PCI DSS standards. So it's incredibly important for them to be compliant to those specifications on a financial network. Config management, as I mentioned, what Gluware is able to do is give you centralized control, and with a declarative mode provisioning, meaning we read what's on the device, we look at the desired state that you've defined in Gluware, and then we will add or remove or change what's required to match the intended state. So that declarative nature was one of the biggest reasons that Merck chose us for the global automation, and rolled out. They rolled out their global WAN nearly 2 years ago, and are now expanded to tens of thousands of devices in their network. So security, again, top of mind. And although Gluware is not a pure play on security, handling the configuration integrity and the configuration management, and even automating state assessment, giving your team the ability to troubleshoot and respond rapidly, is incredibly valuable. Minimizing downtime and outages. I mean, this one almost sounds trivial, but it is still a real struggle today. Again, many of the reports out there talk about that IT teams can't add value to the organization if they're spending too much time on operations and maintenance and troubleshooting. And these issues and outages are caused primarily by manual errors. Even the best of us can fat finger things when we're working something at 3 in the morning, or we're in a high stress situation, firefighting and trying to find a problem, and really trying anything, sometimes desperate measures, like again removing ACLs, to try to solve problems in real time. Oftentimes, operations are also struggling with legacy management products. So the tools they have are so limited that they are kind of forced to do things manually, or when they use the tools, they're forced to use a tool they don't really trust. And then they're spending time, since the legacy tools oftentimes don't do a validation of the change, they can blast out a config change, but they don't validate. So they sit there nervously and look at their monitoring map, like you see in this picture, and just hoping the network doesn't go red when the SNMP starts pulling, right? Unauthorized changes. we often hear there's kind of too many cooks in the kitchen, too many people have read-write access to these devices, and people can make unauthorized changes, taking things out of policy. The time spent troubleshooting, we were speaking to an organization recently where when there's an outage, one of their engineers runs roughly 20 commands manually and starts hopping through every device. And this is something that we help them automate. And then manual processes. So like oftentimes there's from blanking on the term for it, but engineering and architecture write process documentation that operations is following. And so they open up their guide and start running through it. And usually the folks on the front line, many of them are early in their career, so really just following the guidelines and guides that they've been instructed. So again, Gluware, with our ability to automate configuration, can eliminate those manual errors. We can replace the legacy products that aren't implementing modern techniques for automating, especially when devices are CLI based and not programmatic. Gluware can identify unauthorized changes through drift. We can automate troubleshooting. And again, anything that can be well defined as a manual process can be automated into a workflow. So again, we're going to move fairly quickly here. Hopefully I'm not belaboring the points too much, but I do have a goal of trying to wrap up and give you a little bit of time back on the hour. Use case number 3 about compliance. And compliance is also a word that makes folks in operations cringe a bit, because there are paper policies that your own organization should keep. Oftentimes engineering architecture will define what the standards are. Then there are third party. I mentioned PCI DSS and HIPAA and SOX, and there's many, many others. Depending on if you're a public company or what vertical you're in, if you're in finance or if you're in healthcare, the network has to be compliant. So these audits can be quite painful and time consuming, but falling out of compliance, you could be even in more risky situations. And then there's also a need for ad hoc audits. And one of the things I want to tie back to is when you're tracking those vendor vulnerabilities, oftentimes when you read a security advisory, it'll say, if you're using this config statement, or if you're configuring something in this way, and you need to understand if you're exposed or not. So enabling the ability to run an ad hoc audit to figure out if you have any devices that are in that condition. So again, where Gluware comes in is with the audit engine. It's an extremely powerful utility or app that enables you to define policies using native vendor CLI and regex, and execute regularly audits to ensure your devices are meeting your internal policies, are meeting your third-party compliance, and gives you the ability to run those ad hoc audits. So incredibly important, and again, vital. Once folks have audit, they're really happy, because some of the legacy products they've been using are essentially running these really bloated scripts, difficult to write, test, maintain. And so oftentimes an alternative is some older legacy product with maybe one person has expertise in an organization of how to even edit or create or augment those scripts. And with Gluware, it enables really anyone in engineering or operations to define and run audits. Accelerating to cloud. I saw this image and really loved it, because cloud has become so important, and anyone in networking today needs to understand the effect of cloud on the network, how the network connects to the cloud, how the network extends into the cloud, and how the policies on your network need to also be the policies that exist in your cloud. So what you're going to see, and I'm sure your organizations face this, is that there is a strategic business need. And the end goal is not cloud. The end goal is what cloud enables. Maybe it's the dynamic scale. Maybe it's the seasonality of your business. Like, Intuit is a well-known major user of Amazon Web Services, because as a tax company, their usage surges around tax time, and then other parts of the year they have way decreased usage. And so instead of having all that compute in on-prem data center, they can run it in the cloud and scale as needed. And there's many others. We helped onboard. We helped Merck accelerate their move to the cloud by more than 9 months. And in their case, they were having to backhaul traffic to exchange points to Microsoft Azure as they moved their mail servers to Azure and they moved their storage with MS OneDrive. And it changes the traffic on your network. And in Merck's case, to that point, the sites that they were migrating did not have the ability to perform like an internet breakout. So as you start to look at other mechanisms and leverage things like SD-WAN and others, you're going to be dealing with having to manage policies to direct traffic to an internet or carry it over the WAN. You're also going to have to deal with distributed security, so integrated firewalls or distributed firewalls, because you now have more entrance points if you're using internet to connect to cloud resources. So again, this starts to get a little redundant, but like where Gluware comes in is by being able to manage any configuration element. In Merck's case, Gluware automated the QoS, so class maps, policy maps, ACLs. We automated SNMP for the monitoring of the traffic. We automated NetFlow for the visibility of those traffic flows. And that was just in the first phase. Merck ended up extending and automating more and more over time. And the key to it is that in that particular case, you can think about a design and a rollout to support cloud, but it is always changing and it always needs to be tuned. So the benefit of automating with Gluware is that as you need to tune and tweak the network, you can modify those parameters on the fly. And with Merck's example, if they would have outsourced it, they probably would have got one change done within a calendar year, maybe two. By going to Gluware, they actually modified QoS more than 9 times before the end of the year in tuning and tweaking their policies. And this is publicly shared information Merck shared through multiple venues for us. So they are a public reference. Use case 5, halfway through the list, and I'm going to pick up the pace a little bit. Network optimization. This is also a key one. The pain point most organizations share with us is that the optimization challenge comes from legacy devices, or the so-called technical debt, and that challenge of the multi-vendor, multi-platform, as well as the legacy management systems and homegrown scripts and manual efforts. So I think you're seeing some common threads through these things as you begin to replace legacy products, replace or eliminate some homegrown scripts, and move away from manual efforts. It's the benefits cascade across all these use cases. But with Gluware, we are able to, provide an automation solution that will enable you to perform those ongoing optimizations. So it could be, the daily modifications of things like syslog, or SNMP, or as I mentioned, Merck's use case of tuning QoS. All of these things can be fully automated with Gluware. NetOps agility. So this one is maybe less of a use case, but more of a desired state. We often, when we kind of perform an assessment with customers, we talk about what is your current state. Many of them say it's 7 to 10 days for most network changes to take effect from the time a ticket is submitted and requested. That's a very long period of time. I mean, you're looking at really 10 days is two business weeks. It's a lot of time. And the issue is like these manual and reactive processes. And so, organizations are kind of resistant to change. And you also end up with very siloed expertise. So if a change requires a change to a router, a switch, a firewall, a load balancer, down along the line, it oftentimes will have to go through the siloed or serial workflow to get those things done. Another pain point that we're hearing from customers is that certain changes are outsourced. And so when you outsource, you have to define a project, define the task, define the scope. It has a whole bunch of overhead. You push it to the outsourcer, then the outsourcer has time to execute it, and it could be days or even months depending on the scope of the project. So when you look at all those things and you think about implementing automation, you, as mentioned in one of the leading slides, we can reduce that down to network changes within 24 hours. And it's like, how can you get the changes down that much? Well, we automate the process in testing. You can move from test to production very easily. When you're making minor changes that are very proven, like maybe just adding, an NTP server or making minor changes, these are very low risk changes as you're working through those. And again, automation done right, and it at least working and attacking those problems that are causing the most pain within your organization. Lifecycle management, this one is kind of a derivative of it, and that when you think of lifecycle, there's really two frames to look at. There's a lifecycle of a device, and there's a lifecycle of a service, right? And when you think of the device, and this is a question we get oftentimes because we're known for kind of the brownfield or the existing network and automating what you have. Well, it's like, what about the greenfield, or what about deploying that new? And what can you do about staging operating systems? And then how do you address ongoing moves, adds, changes, or even swaps or upgrades of devices? And so we love this question because Gluware has great answers, and that our config modeling supports zero-touch provisioning, so or advanced. So if there's a bootstrap or something on the device where it's reachable, or if not, zero-touch through USB boot, we can actually handle the initial provisioning of a device to that intended first config state. And then once it's online, it is managed by Gluware. You manage those devices through Gluware for the ongoing moves, adds, changes. Similarly, we've had customers struggle with operating system management, and Gluware can also, in the zero-touch provisioning, we can also perform an operating system upgrade right as the device goes in, or stage it to take place at some later point using the OS management app. And Gluware also can automate upgrades or even swaps of devices. So we've helped customers swap from older products from the same vendor to the newer product from the same vendor. We've even helped automate swaps from one vendor to another. So all of that is possible, and it is largely leveraged by the Gluware data modeling technology and our ability to speak and read and write to the multi-vendors and multiple platforms. OS management, this one I've already hit quite a few times already because it's related to so many other things, but when you think about upgrading, it's one of the most painful things that you have to do in operations. You have to pre-stage and test. You have to certify the operating system you're going to deploy. You then have to transfer the image onto the device. When going through that, you need to figure out, is there room on the device? Once you transfer it, did it pass a checksum? I mean, there's so many steps to it. And when you're going through a lot of devices, it's easy to skip or miss steps and maybe restart a device and brick it, really turn it into an unusable device, therefore maybe needing a truck roll, right? Deploying someone out to the site. So, why are you forced to upgrade so often? Well, the vendor vulnerabilities, that's the biggest one driving our users to try to get to monthly updates. The requirement for new features. Recently working with a customer deploying network administration control, and they had to upgrade most of their switches to get to that feature set. So sometimes you have to be at a minimum level of operating system to enable new features. You have operating systems going end of life or end of sale, which are end of support. Therefore, they won't be supported by the vendors. There's no fixing or bugs or patches. So those have to be done. And overall, it's a risky process. So again, Gluware is able to help address this in many ways through the OS Manager app. Near the end here, only a few more slides left. Use case number 9, inventory and assessment. This is down at 9 because it's not like on the top of everybody's list. But if actually you look at a lot of the reports around automation, everyone says, start with the easier tasks or get to a known state. So one of the problems we run into all the time with the customers we interact with is when we say, what is your current source of truth for the devices in your network? And you get different responses. Some say, well, we have it in our management system, we have it in our CMDB, but when we actually inventory the audit, Gluware has a dynamic inventory capability with Device Manager. we often find lots of discrepancies. So most organizations don't have a real-time mechanism and have it integrated with a source of truth, even if it's, let's say, not within Gluware, maybe it's in Remedy or some other system, to actually be checking and keeping that up to date. You also have lack of standards enforcement. So standards when it comes to, let's say I standardize an operating system. Well, if that device wasn't staged properly, it's now out of standard, right? Or, so that's a common one. I've been mentioning keeping up with the vendors, always changing things. And then, just back to the step that, inventory and the assessment are fundamental steps to automate the read and get to a known state. Finally, 10 has really two things. One is that as I mentioned, most organizations have legacy tools, and they have legacy manual processes. They have homegrown scripts, and they also have new things and things that aren't going away or they don't want to go away from, right? Maybe their ticketing systems or their change management databases or their IPAM. So this one is probably one of the hardest because change is hard, right? This is a cultural thing. And once you can, let's say, prove it out through POCs or test drive or whatever mechanism you need to evaluate tools, once you can prove it out and you can, validate it, oftentimes you can replace many of these legacy tools, replace these legacy processes, replace or augment things that are scripted. And then you can move towards maybe the most valuable thing to deliver to your organization, which is things that are highly integrated. So integrating with ServiceNow or Remedy or your IPAM or these other capabilities can really deliver end-to-end processes that are automated through workflows instead of task-based automation. So in closing, just I think 2 quick slides is you can't skip the business case piece of it. You have to define for your organization why this financially makes sense. So when you look at the cost elements, you have to really assess what does it cost you to perform manual changes. And most organizations can define a small, a medium, or a large change. Those things are allocated in different times, maybe a 30-minute, a 45-minute, or 1 hour, or maybe more. And then once you understand your labor cost, you can understand what those are costing you. Next is, if you have gone down that path of in-house development and are trying to script or trying to build software, you have to really think about where it makes sense to build your own and where it makes sense to use something off the shelf. We're seeing really good products in the marketplace that stitch things together and interact with cloud or, or API integration. Often Gluware supports a published API, so there's ability for it to trigger Gluware, consume Gluware programmatically, and that's maybe where development is worthwhile in connecting systems versus in-house development of network specific programming. It's there's cost in the development, the testing, and the support. The cost spent troubleshooting, and what is the cost of outsourcing, and seeing what makes sense. And if you can actually bring things back in-house, if you automate them. And then what is the cost of the legacy tools? There is a cost to maintain them, and there's a cost to keep people trained on them. And then, so, savings pretty much align is the labor cost, the development savings cost, the troubleshooting savings, the outsource savings, the consolidation of tool savings. And some of the, again, if you want to work through an ROI, Gluware is very happy to help with a lot of material to help build a business case and ROI. But when you look at cost per change per device and the number of changes, and you subtract what your automation platform would cost, we're oftentimes seeing 3 and 4 changes across your network. You're already at a break even. So it really is you're getting to very strong ROIs. And if you look at total cost of ownership, automation really is justified very easily. So definitely, you got to do the homework and do the ROI. So final slide here, plan for action. Monday, so today's Wednesday, so we'll give you a little break. On Monday, meet with your team and get buy-in from your organization. If you don't have a strategic plan, start to form what what your strategy is for automation. And next is to perform a detailed internal assessment to determine your current state. We love helping customers with this, understanding what's done manually, what's done with legacy products, what's done with homegrown scripts that they may want to move away from. And the other thing you could do, it only takes probably about 2 hours, is if you register and take the Gluware test drive. The test drive allows you to execute several common use cases on an online system, and you can at least see what it's like to kick the tires of having a platform that is automating those tasks for you. With real customers, in the first 30 days of using Gluware, you can execute a real-time inventory of your network. You can also leverage the assessment. This capability is for Cisco only at this point, but we'd like to expand it as other vendors provide API access for these integrations. But through API access through Cisco, we can check SmartNet status, end of life, end of sale, and security advisories on your current install base of equipment that is supported by those APIs. And you can begin to monitor configs for change, and that's config drift, and implement policy-based config audits. So those first 30 days are all read-only type functions. And a lot of the research out there will say, focus on automating non-change activities first. So your inventory, your drift, your audit, your troubleshooting, begin with those steps. Next 30 days into the 60 days of the product, here's where you're going to be auditing for standards-based compliance. By this point, you should have your working with Gluware or building them yourself. You should have your compliance rules built. You should be able to begin to automate at least standard features. You should have, at the time, you've had time to become comfortable and trust the product to begin to automate standard features. You can begin automating operating system upgrades and automating state assessment or troubleshooting. It's a new capability exposed in our last released Gluware 3.5, and we continue to expand on that capabilities. Getting into the first quarter with Gluware, those 90 days, now you should be ready, and again, we help you along the way, automating complex tasks. So network administration control, QoS redesigns, many other use cases here across the categories I was talking about on this call, where you can automate really complex things with Gluware. And through Gluware's ability to abstract and verify, you're going to have trust that it implements these successfully. Usually within those first 90 days is where customers have also begun implementing custom workflows that are solving very specific processes that they want to automate. Again, they could be deployment oriented or troubleshooting oriented or just network optimization oriented. This is also where oftentimes we're integrating third-party APIs. Usually those are done through workflows on things like ServiceNow and others. And also at this stage, oftentimes customers can begin to leverage Gluware API. So you can trigger Gluware to perform a dynamic inventory and compare it, or trigger Gluware to do things like run a drift or audit, and you get fully programmatic response on the success. So hope those things help with recommended next steps and actions you look to move forward on. Just a very quick thing to say, I referenced a few research reports. Gluware sponsored an EMA report titled Enterprise Networking Automation for 2020 and Beyond. You can download that from our site. We work with 451 analysts like Mike Fratto, and they have some very good papers out there, like Adaptive Networking Market Map. Gartner has some excellent papers that you can that were referenced and looked at for this material about reducing technical debt in the enterprise, and a very interesting paper by Simone Ricard that highlights Gluware and how you can move towards automating your network using DevOps practices and looking at infrastructure as code. So that one is probably one of the most progressive in terms of thinking about where automation needs to go. Very, very good paper. So with that, we will, in the sake of time, we'll forego Q&A. Let me see. I think we'll forego the Q&A and give you a few minutes back. I thank you for your attending either live or taking some time to watch the recording. If you want a nice next step, again, you can do on any day, even today, you could request the test drive, so gluware.com/test drive, and we'll set you up with an online system to kick the tires. You can also email us or click on our website, gluware.com, to request the demo. So again, thank you very much. Appreciate your time today and look forward to helping you in your automation challenges for 2020. This concludes the webinar. Thank you.